It was a freezing Tuesday evening when my elderly neighbor stopped me outside my mailbox and whispered, "I hope I'm wrong, but I've been hearing a baby crying in your house after midnight." I stared at her. "That's impossible. My daughter and her husband don't have children." She hesitated before adding, "Last night I even saw someone holding a baby in your guest room." That night I quietly checked the room myself. By sunrise, hidden cameras were watching every corner of my house. Welcome to Calm Family Revenge. I am grateful you are here. Drop a comment and tell me what city or country you are watching from. I want to know how far this reaches. And one thing worth noting, some details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes. But everything it teaches you, that part is yours to keep. Tuesday evening, November 12th, 2024. The air outside had that particular bite to it that Asheville gets in mid-November. Cold enough to remind you winter is serious business in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Cold enough to make your knuckles ache if you forgot your gloves. I had forgotten mine. I was checking the mailbox at the end of our front walk when I heard her voice. Raymond. Dorothy Finch stood at the edge of her driveway next door, wrapped in a quilted housecoat the color of old mustard. Her silver hair pinned back beneath a wool hat she'd probably owned since the Reagan administration. She was 74 years old, 5 feet 2 inches of sharp eyes and careful manners. And in the 11 years Maggie and I had lived on Sycamore Hill Road, she had never once knocked on our door uninvited. She believed in privacy the way some people believe in religion, absolutely and without apology, which is why the look on her face stopped me cold. "Hi, Dorothy." I tucked the mail under my arm and crossed the frost-stiffened grass toward her. "Everything okay?" She clasped her hands in front of her tight the way people do when they're trying to hold something difficult inside just a little longer. Her breath made small clouds in the evening air. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice dropping low even though the street was empty in both directions. "I hope I'm wrong. I truly do. But I've been hearing babies crying from your house the last few nights. Very late after midnight." I stared at her. "Babies crying. A baby's cry is a particular sound, Raymond. You don't mistake it for anything else." She pressed her lips together. "And last night around 1 in the morning I couldn't sleep, my hip was acting up again, and I looked out my bedroom window. Your guest room light was on. I saw a silhouette through the curtain. A woman, I think, holding something small, rocking back and forth." My chest tightened in a way I didn't like. "Dorothy, Diane, and Scott don't have children. They've been saying next year for 3 years now. I know that." She met my eyes and hers were steady and serious. "That's why I'm telling you. I almost didn't. I know it's not my business, and Lord knows I've minded my own my whole life." Her voice dropped further. "But I had a son, Raymond. 30 years ago, my boy made some mistakes with money, his own father's money as it turned out, and nobody said a word because nobody wanted to make trouble. By the time I understood what was happening, there was nothing left to save." She exhaled slowly. "I am not going to be the neighbor who stayed quiet again." I reached out and touched her arm. "Thank you," I said. "I mean that." She squeezed my hand, once her fingers cold and dry. "Be careful," she said softly. Then she turned and walked back to her house, her slippered feet moving carefully across the icy driveway. I stood there in the dark for a moment, the mail growing damp under my arm, looking up at the second floor of our house. The guest room window was dark now, curtains drawn, nothing moving. I went inside. Maggie was in the kitchen, standing at the island with a glass of red wine and a cutting board full of onions, humming something low and tuneless, the way she always does when she cooks. She was 68 years old, my wife, and she still made my chest feel full just by being in a room. She looked up when I came in, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. "Everything okay out there?" "Fine." The word came out easier than I expected. "Just chatting with Dorothy." Maggie smiled and went back to her onions. "She doing all right? I keep meaning to bring her some of that corn chowder she liked." "She's fine," I said. "Same as always." I hung my coat on the hook by the door and stood there for a moment, looking at the ceiling above the kitchen, at the floor joists, at the plaster, at the fact that somewhere above us was a guest room where, according to a 74-year-old woman who had never been wrong about anything in her life, someone had been standing at 1 in the morning holding a child. Diane and Scott had been here 10 days ago for Sunday dinner. Pot roast Maggie's recipe, the one that takes all day. Scott had helped me carry the extra chairs up from the basement. Diane had complimented the new rug in the hallway and asked for the second time that month whether we'd updated our estate planning documents since Maggie and I got married 6 years ago. I had told her not to worry about it. I excused myself after dinner, told Maggie I was going up to find a book, and walked quietly down the hall to the guest room. The door was closed. I turned the handle and pushed it open. The room looked exactly as it always did. The navy blue comforter pulled neat and smooth. The nightstand with its single lamp and the small framed print of the Smoky Mountains that Maggie had found at a flea market in Hendersonville. The closet door shut, but as I stood in the doorway, something caught at the back of my throat. Faint, almost nothing. The ghost of a smell. Warm milk. The particular sweetness of infant formula. I stood very still, my hand on the doorframe, and felt the hairs on my arms rise beneath my shirt. I closed the door quietly and went back downstairs. I ate dinner. I listened to Maggie talk about the foundation board meeting she had coming up on Thursday. I nodded in the right places and refilled her wine glass and told her the chicken was delicious. But I did not sleep that night. Wednesday morning, November 13th, 2024. I told myself somewhere around 4 in the morning, when the ceiling above me had stopped being interesting, that I was being paranoid. That Dorothy Finch was a lovely woman who had been through something painful with her son, and who perhaps saw trouble where there wasn't any. That formula smell was probably nothing. Maybe a neighbor's baby had visited weeks ago, and the scent had lingered. That Diane, whatever her occasional fixation on wills and estate documents, was my daughter, and I had known her for 34 years. I told myself all of that, and then I heard Maggie hit the kitchen floor. It was 7 in the morning. I was in the hallway at the top of the stairs pulling on a sweater when the sound came, not a crash, exactly more like a sudden wrongness, a muffled thud, and then the clatter of something ceramic shattering the coffee mug, I learned later, that had flown out of her hand on the way down. And then nothing. No cry, no call for help. Just silence, which was somehow worse than any sound could have been. I was down those stairs in seconds I cannot account for. Maggie was on the kitchen floor beside the coffee maker, her cheek against the tile, her right arm bent awkwardly beneath her. Her skin was the color of old candle wax. Her lips had gone slightly bluish at the edges, and her chest was moving in shallow, rapid pulls, like she was trying to breathe through a wet cloth pressed over her face. "Maggie." I dropped to my knees beside her, my hands on her face, tilting her chin. "Maggie, I'm right here. Stay with me." Her eyes rolled, found me briefly, then drifted. Her fingers twitched against the tile. I grabbed my phone off the counter and dialed 911. The dispatcher answered on the second ring, and I gave my address in a voice that surprised me with its steadiness, because inside I was coming apart at every seam. The ambulance arrived in 6 minutes. I know because I counted every one of them while I held Maggie's hand and watched her chest rise and fall and told her over and over that she was going to be fine even though I had spent 30 years in federal courtrooms, and knew exactly what it meant when the body stopped fighting. She was still unconscious when they loaded her onto the stretcher. I rode in the front of the ambulance because they wouldn't let me in the back. The paramedic driving said something about her vitals stabilizing. I looked straight ahead at the road and did not respond. At Mission Hospital, they took her through double doors I wasn't allowed to follow, and I sat in a plastic chair in the emergency waiting room for 40 minutes with dried coffee on my shirt and my hands laced together between my knees. Dr. Walter Sims came to find me just before 9. He was in his mid-40s, lean with the careful, deliberate manner of a physician who had learned to deliver bad news without flinching. He sat down across from me rather than standing, which told me something before he said a word. "Mr. Caldwell," he kept his voice low, "we've run a full toxicology panel. Your wife has aconitine in her system." I looked at him. "Explain that to me." Aconitine is a naturally occurring alkaloid toxin derived from monkshood, a flowering plant also known as wolfsbane that grows throughout the eastern United States. It's extraordinarily potent. Even small doses affect cardiac function and the central nervous system, causing arrhythmia paralysis, and in sufficient quantities, cardiac arrest. He paused. "We've stabilized her. She's going to recover. But the concentration in her blood indicates she's been ingesting small doses over multiple days, most likely mixed into food or medication. At the levels we found, this was not accidental exposure, Mr. Caldwell. Someone administered this to her deliberately." The waiting room hummed around me. A television in the corner was running the morning news with the sound off. A woman across the room was feeding crackers to a toddler. "How long?" I asked. "Based on tissue absorption patterns, we estimate 3 to 5 days of repeated exposure." 3 to 5 days. I thought about Sunday dinner. The pot roast Maggie had cooked all day. The wine glasses Diane had carried to the table. "Does anyone have regular access to your home?" Sims asked carefully. "Anyone who handles your food or your wife's medications?" "Our daughter," I said. "She has a key." Sims didn't write that down, and I was glad. I wasn't ready for police. Not yet. I needed to think clearly, and I could not think clearly with detectives in the room asking questions I didn't have answers to yet. By 3 that afternoon, Maggie was awake, pale and exhausted, her hand wrapped around mine in the hospital bed. "Nathan." Her voice came out as barely a sound. "Raymond," I said gently. It was an old joke between us. She had an ex-husband named Nathan, and occasionally the name surfaced from her sleep. She managed a thin smile. "What's happening?" she whispered. "You're going to be fine," I said. "That's what's happening." I called Arthur Pennington from the hospital corridor, my attorney of 20 years, and the foundation's treasurer, a solid gray-haired man who had navigated 3 decades of complicated legal terrain without ever raising his voice. I told him enough. He booked Maggie a hotel room downtown under the name Sarah Whitmore. Cash payment. No credit card trail. "Raymond," Arthur said, his voice careful, "you should call the police." "Not yet," I said. "I need evidence first. If I'm wrong about this, I don't come back from it." By 6 that evening, Maggie was checked into the Haywood Park Hotel in downtown Asheville under her alias. I kissed her forehead, tucked the room key into her hand, and told her to open the door for no one, not room service, not housekeeping, and not Diane. She grabbed my wrist as I turned to leave. "Raymond." Her eyes were clear now and frightened. "Don't do anything alone." "I'm just going home to think," I told her. That was only partly a lie. Wednesday night, November 13th, 2024. The electronics depot on Tunnel Road was open until midnight, and nearly empty at 11 p.m., the fluorescent lights overhead, making everything look slightly wrong, slightly overexposed, the way crime scenes look in photographs. A teenage clerk was reorganizing a display of HDMI cables near the back and didn't look up when I came in. I moved through the aisles with a basket and a specific list I had worked out in the car. I needed eyes inside my own house. The cameras I chose were consumer-grade wireless units, each one built into an ordinary household object to avoid detection. A smoke detector for the living room ceiling angled to capture the front door and the couch. A wall clock for above the kitchen table, wide-angle lens, full room coverage. A picture frame for the upstairs hallway facing the staircase. A bookshelf unit for my home office tucked between law volumes aimed at my desk. A thermostat housing for the guest bedroom wall covering the bed and the window where Dorothy Finch had seen the silhouette. Each camera offered 1080p night vision resolution motion-activated recording and automatic upload to a password-protected cloud account. Meaning that even if someone found the cameras and destroyed them, the footage already existed on a server I could access from anywhere in the world. The clerk rang everything up without asking a single question. I paid cash. I was back at the house by midnight and had all 5 units installed and synced to my laptop by 2:30 in the morning. I moved quietly through each room, working by the light of my phone, mounting each device with the small adhesive brackets included in the packaging. My hands were steadier than I expected them to be. 30 years of federal court had given me a certain relationship with controlled urgency. When the last camera was live, I opened the app on my laptop and checked each feed. 5 windows, 5 angles. My entire house laid bare on a 13-inch screen. The rooms were empty. The house was quiet. I packed a bag, laptop, external hard drive for backup storage, phone charger, a change of clothes and a toiletry kit, 2 bottles of water and a handful of granola bars from the pantry, the kind Maggie kept for her afternoon walks. I thought about going to the Haywood Park to be near her. I decided against it. I needed to be somewhere I could watch the house uninterrupted, somewhere no one who knew me would think to look. The Ridgeline Motor Inn sat on a state road 20 miles east of Asheville, a single-story row of 12 rooms that charged $42 a night and had a vending machine outside room 7 that still had the original 1990s pricing sticker on the front. I checked in under my real name. There was no point hiding. Before I got into bed, I sent 2 text messages. To Maggie, foundation business came up, sweetheart. Out of town a few days? Don't worry, I'll call tonight. To Diane, heading out of town for work. House will be empty for a few days. Just wanted you to know in case you need anything. I stared at that second message for a long time before I hit send. If Diane was innocent, it meant nothing. A father letting his daughter know he was traveling. Something I had done 100 times. If she wasn't, it was bait. I set the phone on the nightstand and opened the laptop. 5 camera feeds glowed in the darkness of the motel room. Living room dark and still. Kitchen, the under-cabinet light I always left on casting a pale stripe across the floor. Hallway empty. Office, the books on my shelves standing in their familiar rows. Guest bedroom, the navy comforter smooth and undisturbed. I sat back against the headboard and looked at those 5 windows. My daughter had a key to that house. She had been there 10 days ago admiring the rug and asking about our estate documents. The formula smell in the guest room was real. Dorothy Finch had seen a light on at 1 in the morning. And Maggie was lying in a hotel bed downtown with aconitine working its way out of her bloodstream because someone had been feeding it to her for days. I pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes until I saw white. Then I looked back at the screen. The house was quiet. The house was still. I poured the first cup of coffee from the motel's complimentary machine, tasted it, and decided it was survivable. Then I settled in to wait. At 11:47 p.m., the kitchen camera flickered. Motion detected. A shadow crossed the frame, low, deliberate, moving from the direction of the back door. I sat up straight. Thursday night, November 14th, 2024. I was on my feet before I fully understood I was moving. The shadow on the kitchen camera was deliberate. Whoever it was had come through the back door, the one that opened off the mudroom into the small fenced yard, and they had done it carefully, the way someone moves, when they know exactly which floorboards creak and which door hinges groan if you open them too fast. There was no fumbling, no hesitation. The figure stepped inside and stood still for a moment just inside the threshold, head slightly tilted, listening. I turned up the audio on my laptop and leaned closer to the screen. Male. Average height, maybe 5'10". Dark jacket, dark jeans. A baseball cap pulled low over his face so the single camera angle I had on the kitchen couldn't catch his features. He locked the back door behind him with a key, his own key, or one he'd been given, and then moved through the kitchen without touching anything, without opening the refrigerator, without pausing to look around the way a burglar would. He walked like a man navigating a space he had been in before. He headed for the stairs. I switched to the hallway camera and watched him climb to the second floor. His footsteps nearly silent on the carpeted steps, his right hand trailing lightly along the banister. He turned left at the top without hesitating. Guest bedroom. I switched to the thermostat camera mounted in that room and watched him push the door open and step inside. For a moment, the room was dark, and then he clicked on a small lamp on the nightstand, the same lamp with the cream-colored shade that Maggie had chosen because it cast a warm light, and the room came alive on my screen. And then I saw them, 2 children. A boy, maybe 3 years old, wearing dinosaur pajamas, sitting up on a makeshift bed, assembled from couch cushions and folded blankets on the floor beside the window. A girl, younger, 18 months perhaps, still round-cheeked with that particular baby softness that disappears so fast you barely notice, until it's gone, lying curled on her side. Next to him, one tiny fist wrapped around a stuffed rabbit with a missing eye. Both of them blinked at the man in the doorway. Neither of them seemed afraid of him. The man crouched down and pulled a small, soft-sided cooler from the closet. I hadn't known it was there, which meant he'd brought it himself and took out 2 bottles of milk. He handed one to the boy, who took it without a word, and lay back against his pillow, watching the man with large, patient eyes. The girl had started to fuss, a low, climbing whimper that was building toward something louder, and the man scooped her up in one fluid motion, settled her against his shoulder, and began to rock, back and forth, slow and steady. His lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't make out through the audio, and within 90 seconds, the girl's whimpering dropped to nothing. She pressed her face against his neck and went still. I sat back in my chair in that dim motel room and pressed my fist against my mouth. He was not a burglar. He was not a threat. The way he'd picked up that little girl, the automatic ease of it, the way his body had already known exactly how to position her before she even settled, that was not a man who had met these children recently. That was a father. I watched him for another hour. He sat on the floor against the wall, back straight, the girl sleeping against his chest, one hand resting lightly on the boy's back. He did not look at his phone. He did not move unnecessarily. He simply sat there in the low amber light and watched his children breathe the way parents do when something has frightened them badly enough that they need to see it with their own eyes, the rise and fall proof of life. At 11:42, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown number. I opened the message. Mr. Caldwell, I know you're watching. We need to talk, but not tonight. Tomorrow. I'll explain everything. Please don't call the police. The children are safe, I promise. My hands had gone cold. I typed back, "Who are you?" No response came. I looked at the clock camera in the kitchen, the hallway picture frame, the living room smoke detector, all quiet, all empty. I looked back at the guest room feed. The man had not moved. The girl slept on his chest. The boy had rolled onto his side and pulled his blanket up to his chin. I refilled my coffee from the motel machine and sat back down. At 12:30, the man laid the girl gently beside her brother, tucked the blanket around both of them, with the careful precision of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and sat back against the wall with his knees drawn up and his arms resting across them. His head dropped back against the plaster, his eyes closed. He did not leave. He slept on the floor of my guest room with his children 4 feet away, and I watched him from 20 miles away through a camera hidden in a thermostat housing. And I thought about Dorothy Finch saying a baby's cry is a particular sound. You don't mistake it for anything else. I thought about Maggie lying in a hotel bed downtown with aconitine still working its way out of her blood. I thought about the question I could not yet answer. What did a desperate father hiding in my guest room with 2 small children have to do with someone poisoning my wife? By 7 the next morning, the man was in my kitchen making scrambled eggs. He worked one-handed, the girl balanced on his hip, chattering something at the cabinets, while the boy sat at the table in his dinosaur pajamas, dragging a toy truck back and forth across the placemat. The man found the bread in the cabinet where Maggie always kept it, found the butter in the refrigerator door, and made toast without hunting for anything. He had been told where things were. I wrote that down. Friday, November 15th, 2024. At exactly noon, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it ring twice, then answered. Who is this? A pause. Then a man's voice, quiet and unsteady, like someone trying very hard to hold himself together and not quite managing it. Mr. Caldwell, my name is Dennis Harlow. I'm Scott Pruitt's twin brother. I went very still. His what? Twin. Identical. We haven't been close in years. Different lives. He exhaled. 3 weeks ago, your daughter reached out to me. She said she'd found me through a private investigator. She offered me $15,000 to stay in your house for a week. She said you and your wife were traveling for work, and she needed the house to look occupied for insurance purposes. She said all I had to do was keep the lights on at night, not answer the door if anyone came by, and she said I looked enough like Scott that if any neighbors happened to see me through a window, it would seem like family was around. The coffee in my hand had gone cold without my noticing. $15,000. 5 up front, he said. 10 when the job was done. Mr. Caldwell, I know how it sounds, but I needed the money. I am in the middle of a custody dispute over Cole and Lily, my kids, the ones you've been seeing on your cameras, and my attorney has been carrying my account for 3 months. In family court in North Carolina, when your lawyer withdraws mid-case for non-payment, the judge doesn't pause the proceedings. The hearing keeps going, and you show up without representation, and that is how fathers lose their children. His voice cracked on the last word, and he stopped. I waited. The custody standard in this state is the best interests of the child. He continued, pulling himself back together. My ex-wife's attorney has argued I can't provide stable housing, that I move around too much, that I can't hold a job long enough to establish a home. So when your daughter said I could stay in your house for a week, I thought I could use that time to show the kids what a normal week looked like. Regular meals, regular bedtime, a house with a yard. Something I could document. Something I could bring to the hearing. A long beat of silence. I didn't know your wife was in the hospital. She's recovering, I said. Someone poisoned her, Dennis, over the course of several days. Someone with access to our home. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Oh, God. His voice came out hollow. She told me you were traveling. She said the house was empty. Mr. Caldwell, I swear on my children's lives I did not know. I would never, if I had known someone was being hurt, I would have. I believe you, I said, and I did. 30 years of sitting across from witnesses had given me a reasonably reliable internal instrument for detecting deception, and what I heard in Dennis Harlow's voice was not the particular flatness of a practiced liar. It was raw, genuine terror. Here is what I need from you, I said. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Do not leave the house. Do not call Diane. Do not change anything about your routine. When she contacts you and she will you act normal, you tell her everything is fine. Can you do that? Yes. His answer came immediately. Yes, I can do that. Good. I'll be in touch. I paused. Dennis, you and your children are safe. I give you my word. I ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in my lap, looking at the camera feeds on my laptop screen. In the living room, Cole was building something ambitious and structurally questionable out of a set of wooden blocks. Lily was pulling herself up against the coffee table leg, very pleased with herself letting go for 2 seconds at a time before dropping back to a sit. Dennis was in the kitchen, his back to the camera, gripping the edge of the counter with both hands. His shoulders were rigid. His head was bowed. I opened a new document on my laptop and began to type. Timeline. Week of November 11th, 2024. Diane hires Dennis Harlow Scott's identical twin through private investigator. Pays $5,000 upfront, $10,000 on completion. Dennis unaware of any plan to harm Maggie or myself. His presence in the house serves dual purpose, for Diane House appears occupied and lived in, while actual occupants are removed. I underlined that last word and stared at it. Removed. Then I added, question, what is Diane planning and when? My phone buzzed. A text from Diane. Dad, I heard Claire. I heard Maggie is in the hospital. Are you okay? I'm coming over tomorrow to help. Love you. I read it 3 times, the casual warmth of it, the easy love you dropped at the end like spare change. I typed back, thanks, sweetheart. Managing okay. See you tomorrow. Then I set the phone face down on the nightstand and looked at the ceiling of the motel room and tried to remember the last time my daughter had looked at me and meant it. Friday night, November 15th, 2024. I drove back to Sycamore Hill Road just before midnight, killed the headlights 2 blocks out, and parked on Birchwood Street around the corner from our house. The neighborhood was dark and quiet, the kind of stillness that settles over Asheville's older streets after 10 p.m. when the porch lights click off on timers and the dog walkers have long since gone in. I went in through the back alley. Dennis was standing at the kitchen counter when I came through the mudroom door, his phone in his hand, his face the color of old newsprint. He took a fast step backward and knocked his elbow hard into the cabinet. Easy, I said, keeping my voice low. It's Raymond Caldwell, the real one. He stared at me, chest heaving. Jesus. He pressed a hand flat against the counter. She told me you were on a business trip. I know what she told you. I pulled out a kitchen chair and gestured for him to sit. He sat. Let me tell you what's actually been happening. I told him everything. Maggie's poisoning the cameras, the footage, every piece of it. I kept my voice calm and factual, the way I had learned to deliver difficult rulings, not cold, but controlled, because losing control in front of someone already frightened only makes them less useful to you. When I finished, Dennis put both elbows on the table and pressed his face into his hands. His shoulders shook once hard. Then he pulled himself back. She used me, he said into his palms. Yes. She knew about the custody case. She knew I was desperate. He lifted his face. His eyes were red. She found the one thing I would do anything for, and she used it. That's what she does, I said. Now, I need to show you something downstairs. I led him through the kitchen and down the basement stairs. The wine cellar was through a second door at the bottom, cool and dim smelling of oak and cork and cold stone. The French oak wine rack stood against the far wall where it had stood for 11 years, 7 feet tall, 12 shelves deep loaded with bottles Maggie and I had collected from Napa and Willamette Valley and a trip to the Finger Lakes the year after we married. It was not bolted to the wall. I had always meant to anchor it. I moved to the far corner to a section of the concrete wall that looked identical to every other section, unless you knew what you were looking for. I crouched and pressed my palm against a vertical seam, almost invisible, unless the light caught it at exactly the right angle. A panel clicked and lifted on hydraulic hinges, silent and smooth, revealing a steel ladder descending into darkness. Dennis stared. "What is that?" "The previous owner was a Foreign Service diplomat," I said. "He built this in the late 1980s. I found it 2 years ago during a foundation inspection." I climbed down. Dennis followed carefully. The panic room was 8 feet by 10 steel-walled LED lighting on battery backup. A narrow cot against one wall. Steel shelving stocked with canned goods, bottled water, a first aid kit, a hand crank radio. A ventilation system pulling fresh air through a pipe beneath the back porch. Enough airflow for 2 adults for 72 hours. And in the corner of the lowest shelf, half hidden behind a row of soup cans, a small wooden box I had never seen before. Mahogany with a simple brass latch. Perhaps 8 inches long, 5 inches wide. I had checked this room twice since finding it 2 years ago, once during the initial inspection, once 8 months ago to test the battery backup. Both times I had looked at the shelves and seen only the supplies the diplomat had left behind. I had never moved the soup cans. I had never looked behind them. Someone had placed it there before I ever found this room. Someone who had known it existed long before I did. And there was only one person who could have known my hand moved toward it and stopped. Dennis was watching me. "I've been operating out of a motel 20 miles away," I said, pulling my attention back. "I've decided to move my base of operations here, starting tonight." I walked him through everything: the folding table, the laptop, the camera feeds, the cloud backups. Then I told him about Sunday. About what I believed Diane was planning before the week was out. Dennis went very pale. "Chitel, here is what I'm going to do," I said. "I'm wiring $20,000 into your account tonight. It covers your legal fees and gives you a cushion for what comes after. In exchange, you take Cole and Lily and leave Sunday morning before 10. Go to Brevard or Hendersonville. Stay until I contact you. And when this is over, I need your testimony." Dennis stared at me. $20,000. "Your account number," I said, and held out my phone with the banking app open. He gave it to me quietly. I entered the transfer, categorized it as a legal consultation fee, and confirmed. Funds would clear by 7 a.m. I tore a page from my notepad and wrote Arthur Pennington's name and number on it. "If anything happens before Sunday, call this man. He'll have copies of everything. You and your children will be protected." Dennis took the paper and folded it carefully like something fragile. "Mr. Caldwell." His voice was rough. "Thank you. Thank your kids," I said. "They're the reason you're still a decent man." He headed upstairs. I waited until I heard the guest room door close above me. Then I turned back to the shelf. The mahogany box sat exactly where it had been, the brass latch catching the LED light. My hand moved toward it again, and this time I did not stop. The latch opened easily. Inside, resting on a square of folded green velvet, was a white envelope. The handwriting on the front, my name Raymond, in the careful looping script I would have recognized anywhere in any light at any distance, was Eleanor's. My first wife had been dead for 7 years. I stood in the cold of that underground room, holding an envelope she had left for me, and I could not move, and I could not speak. And the only sound in the world was the soft, mechanical hum of the ventilation system pulling air through a pipe beneath the porch. Saturday, November 2nd, 2024. 2 in the morning, and the panic room hummed around me with the particular quiet of sealed spaces, no wind, no traffic, no house settling in the cold the way old houses do. Just the ventilation system pulling steady air through the pipe in the wall, and the soft LED light overhead, and the envelope in my hands. I sat down on the cot with my back against the steel wall and turned the envelope over. Eleanor Ruth Caldwell had the most distinctive handwriting I had ever seen. She had learned calligraphy as a girl from her grandmother in Savannah, and even in her most casual notes, grocery lists, birthday cards, the small folded squares she used to slip into my jacket pockets before I left for court. Her letters had that particular quality of having been placed on the page with intention. Every curve deliberate, every line exactly where she meant it to be. My name on the front of this envelope was written in that hand. I opened it. Inside were 2 things: a folded letter 4 pages front and back written in Eleanor's small, careful script. And beneath it a sheaf of loose pages, maybe 20 sheets, covered in the same handwriting, but faster, less controlled, dated entries, going back what appeared to be several years. I unfolded the letter first. Raymond, if you are reading this, then one of 2 things has happened. Either I left this here and forgot to tell you, which would be very like me, or something has gone wrong and you found it on your own. I hope with everything I have that it is the first. I want to start by telling you that I love you. I want you to know that before anything else, because what I am about to write is going to be hard to read, and I need you to hold on to that. I have been watching Diane for 3 years. I know how that sounds. I know you will want to tell me I am wrong, that I am imagining things, that she is our daughter and she loves us. I have told myself those same things many times. But I am a careful woman, Raymond. You have always said so. And careful women notice things. She asks about the will too often. Not the way a daughter asks out of natural curiosity about the future, but the way a person asks when they are calculating. Specific questions. The trust structure. The foundation's succession clauses. Whether your life insurance names her as a secondary beneficiary. I started writing things down 18 months ago because I thought if I put them on paper, they would seem less significant. They did not. Last spring, I found her in your office. She did not hear me come in. She was reading the foundation's financial records, not the summary documents we give the board, but the actual ledger, the one in the lower left drawer of your desk. When I asked her what she was doing, she smiled and said she was just curious about how charitable trusts worked. She smiled, Raymond. That particular smile she has. The one that arrives a half-second too late. I also found a life insurance brochure in her coat pocket last Thanksgiving. It had your name written in the margin in her handwriting next to a policy value I had to sit down after reading. I did not tell you any of this because I had no proof. I had observations and instincts and a feeling in my chest that I could not name without sounding like a woman losing her mind. And I could not bear to do that to you, to put that idea in your head about your own daughter without something solid to stand behind it. But I am leaving this here because if something happens to me, I want you to know that I did not go without seeing it coming. And I want you to be careful. Please, Raymond, be more careful than I was. I love you. 3 times the way we always do. Eleanor, I read it twice. Then I set it down on the cot beside me and sat with my hands open in my lap and stared at the opposite wall. The loose pages were a log, dated entries going back almost 3 years before Eleanor died, written in the quick, uneven hand she used when she was thinking faster than her pen could follow. Each entry was a single observation, a date, a brief description, sometimes just a few words. March 4th, Dee asked again about the trust remainder clause. Said she was just curious. Third time in 6 months. July 19th, found her in the study. Door was closed. Said she was looking for a pen. October 2nd. She asked Walter what the foundation's liquid assets were. He told me afterward. Said it seemed odd coming from her. February 11th. Life insurance brochure. R's name in the margin. The number, April 30th. She asked if we had updated our wills since the foundation was established. I said I wasn't sure. She said we really should. 22 entries. Eleanor had been watching for nearly 3 years and had said nothing because she was protecting me from something she couldn't yet prove. I folded the letter carefully along its original creases and placed it back in the envelope. The log pages I stacked neatly on top of the external hard drive on the folding table. Evidence. Documented, dated in Eleanor's own hand, demonstrating a pattern of behavior going back years before anyone else had thought to look. She had been trying to protect me even then. I pressed the heels of my hands hard against my eyes and held them there until the pressure became something I could focus on, instead of the grief that was trying to come up through my chest, like groundwater through a cracked foundation. Eleanor had known. She had seen it, and she had been afraid, and she had written it all down and hidden it in the safest place in the house, and she had never gotten the chance to tell me. I did not cry. I wanted to. But I was alone in a steel room 20 feet underground, with work still to do, and Eleanor, more than anyone I had ever known, would have understood that. I stood up, straightened my jacket, picked up the log pages, and began to photograph each one with my phone. Then I uploaded them to all 3 cloud accounts. I tucked the letter into my inside jacket pocket against my chest and sat back down at the folding table. At 3:42 in the morning, the office camera on my laptop screen flickered. Motion detected. Saturday, November 16th, 2024. I switched camera feeds before the motion alert had finished sounding. The figure on the hallway camera was moving from the direction of the back door, same entry point, as Dennis, same deliberate, careful gait, but taller. 6 feet, maybe an inch more. Dark jacket, dark gloves. The gloves were the detail that pulled at something in the back of my mind. Dennis had never worn gloves. This person had come prepared to leave no fingerprints. He moved through the kitchen without pausing and turned directly down the hallway toward my home office. Not the guest room, not the master bedroom. The office. He knew exactly where he was going. I switched to the bookshelf camera. The man entered the office and went straight to my desk. He did not look around the room, did not check the windows, did not do any of the cautious scanning that an amateur does when breaking into somewhere unfamiliar. He opened the center drawer, found it empty of anything useful, and moved to the lower left. He pulled it fully open, lifted out a stack of folders and carried them to the desk surface. The lamp on my desk cast enough light that when he leaned over the folders, I could see his face clearly on the camera feed. Gerald Ashton. I had not seen him in person in nearly 2 years, but I had watched his disbarment hearing on the local news in the fall of that year with the particular professional attention of a former federal judge observing the machinery of justice working as intended. Gerald Ashton had spent 11 years as a corporate attorney in Asheville before the North Carolina State Bar revoked his license for conduct involving the forgery of client signatures on settlement documents and the misappropriation of escrow funds totaling slightly over $400,000. He had avoided prison through a combination of restitution payments and an experienced defense attorney, but his license was gone and his practice was gone. and his reputation in the legal community that was the only world he had ever inhabited was gone with them. A man with nothing left to lose, doing careful work in my office at 4 in the morning with borrowed gloves. He worked through the folders methodically. Foundation board minutes. Foundation financial records going back 7 years. My personal estate documents, the will, the trust amendments, the beneficiary designations on the life insurance policies, the property deed. He stacked them in a precise order on the desk surface, pulled out his phone and photographed every page. Not quickly, not carelessly, each page flat, each shot, checked each folder, replaced in exactly the position he had found it. 12 minutes. Then he returned everything to the drawer, closed it, and left the same way he had come. I sat in the panic room and stared at the empty office feed on my screen, and did not move for a long time. Gerald Ashton was not a pawn. Dennis Harlow was a pawn. A desperate father who had been handed a plausible story and a check, and had asked no hard questions because he could not afford to. Gerald Ashton was something different. Gerald Ashton knew exactly what those documents represented, knew exactly which clauses to look for and which figures mattered, and he had come here at 4 in the morning with gloves on to photograph them with the thoroughness of a professional preparing a legal case. They were not just planning to harm Maggie and remove me. They were building the documentation to take everything afterward. The Eleanor Caldwell Memorial Foundation had operated for 7 years. Its endowment built from Eleanor's life insurance payout and the proceeds from assets we had liquidated after her death stood at approximately $8 million. The foundation's succession clause, which I had drafted myself with Arthur Pennington's guidance, and which specified that in the event of my incapacitation or death, the chairmanship would transfer to the next board member in order of seniority, could be rewritten with forged documents if someone had access to the originals and knew what they were doing. Gerald Ashton knew what he was doing. I opened my notebook and wrote in the margin at the bottom of the page I'd been using for the timeline. This is bigger than Maggie. They're after everything. Then I pulled up a search on my laptop. Gerald Ashton plus Scott Pruitt. I was looking for a connection, something that would explain how Diane had found him, how their arrangement had begun. What came back was a single result from a legal trade publication, dated 8 months earlier. A brief item noting that Gerald Ashton, formerly of Ashton and Reed Corporate Law, had been retained as a consultant by a real estate firm with offices in Charlotte. The firm's registered agent was listed in the accompanying documents. The registered agent's name was Nora Whitfield. I wrote that name down and drew a circle around it. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Diane. Dad, I heard Maggie's doing a little better. That's such a relief. I'm thinking of coming by the house tomorrow to check on things. Make sure everything is okay while you're traveling. Love you. I read it once. Then I typed back. That's thoughtful, sweetheart. House could probably use some eyes on it. Thank you. I hit send and set the phone down. She was coming. And now I knew why. Friday, November 22nd, 2024. 6 days had passed since Gerald Ashton photographed my estate documents in the dark of my office, and in those 6 days I had not been idle. I had moved my entire operation into the panic room. The folding table now held 2 laptops, an external hard drive, a legal notepad filled with timeline entries, and a thermos I refilled from the motel coffee machine on my daily drives. I had added a 6th camera mounted in the mailbox housing at the end of the front walk, pointed at the driveway. I wanted a clean shot of whoever arrived, and whenever they arrived. In those 6 days, I had also watched Diane text me 4 times. Each message followed the same pattern, warm, concerned, specific enough to seem genuine, always ending with "love you." She asked about the foundation's November board meeting. She sent a photograph of a casserole she was making for Maggie's recovery. In the 3rd message, she mentioned she had spoken to Arthur Pennington and that he had seemed a little distracted lately. She was testing the edges of my support network. I answered each one in the voice of a tired, grateful father who suspected nothing. On the morning of November 22nd, Diane texted at 9:47, heading over to the house in a bit, "Dad. Just going to water the plants and make sure everything's in order. Don't worry." In the panic room, I watched the driveway camera. At 10:14, her car pulled up. She got out in a gray blazer and dark jeans leather shoulder bag, dressed the way she always dressed between professional obligations, polished and purposeful. She did not pause on the front walk. She walked directly to the front door, used her key, and went inside. I had 5 feeds open. I watched her move through them one by one. She did not go to the plants. She did not check the refrigerator or run the faucet or do any of the things a daughter does when checking on an empty house. She moved through the living room and kitchen and hallway with the focused stride of someone with a specific destination and a specific amount of time. She went upstairs. She went to our bedroom. I switched to the picture frame camera on the dresser. Diane walked directly to Maggie's nightstand and opened the top drawer. She stood looking into it for 3 seconds, 4, then reached in and withdrew Maggie's prescription bottle. Lisinopril 10 milligrams. Maggie's blood pressure medication taken every morning for 6 years, kept in the same drawer, in the same position since the day we moved in. Diane held the bottle up to the window light, shook it once, nodded to herself with the small private satisfaction of someone confirming an expectation. Then she opened her shoulder bag and removed an identical bottle. My breath stopped somewhere in my chest. 2 bottles on the nightstand. Same manufacturer. Same label. Same amber plastic. Same white capsules. An identical replacement prepared in advance carried here without anyone seeing. Diane unscrewed the cap on Maggie's bottle and tipped the contents into her palm. 21 capsules, 3 weeks' supply. She folded them into one of Maggie's own tissues, the lavender-scented ones from the nightstand box, and put the tissue into her jacket pocket. Then she opened the second bottle and poured its contents into the empty prescription container. Same size, same shape, but not the same medication. Under federal law, tampering with a pharmaceutical product, substituting one substance for another in a labeled prescription container, is a federal criminal offense under Title 18 of the United States Code, carrying up to 10 years per count. Diane had committed that offense in the time it took to fold a tissue. She returned the bottle to the drawer label facing exactly the same direction it had been facing. She smoothed the drawer closed, stepped back, surveyed the room with the evaluating eye of someone checking their own work. Then she went downstairs. I switched to the kitchen camera. Diane set her bag on a chair and crouched beside the table. From the bag, she took a small black cylindrical device 2 inches long, a wireless listening bug, the kind sold in law enforcement supply catalogs, designed to transmit audio up to 40 feet to a paired receiver. She pressed it against the underside of the table where the wood grain held the adhesive without additional mounting. When she pulled her hand back, the device was invisible from any standing angle. She checked her phone, sent a text. 10 seconds later, a response came. She read it and smiled small, closed a smile that did not reach her eyes and put the phone away. She picked up her bag and walked to the front door. 17 minutes start to finish. The medication swapped the listening device, the final check. She had not hesitated once. The front door closed behind her. I sat in the panic room with my arms braced against the table edge and did not move for a long time. I thought about the girl who had cried at Eleanor's funeral, who had held my hand through the reception and told me she missed her too, who had sat across my Thanksgiving table 34 times. Then I opened my browser and searched for counter-surveillance equipment compatible with wireless audio bugs. There was a consumer-grade device, $42 next-day delivery. It claimed to intercept and mirror the signal from wireless transmitters within range. If Diane was listening to my house, I was going to listen to her listening. I ordered it and opened my notebook and wrote at the top of a fresh page, in careful block letters, November 22nd. 10:14 a.m., Diane entered, swapped Maggie's lisinopril with unknown substance, planted wireless audio device under kitchen table, in and out in 17 minutes. Confident. No hesitation. She has done this before. I underlined that last sentence twice. Then I looked at Eleanor's letter in my jacket pocket, the corner of the envelope just visible above the fabric, and understood with a certainty that settled into my bones like cold water that Eleanor had been right about everything. Before I tell you what I heard through those headphones that night, what Diane said about Eleanor in her own voice drop still here in the comments, so I know you are with me. What comes next changed everything. Note some elements ahead are dramatized for storytelling purposes. If that is not for you, feel free to stop here. Saturday, November 23rd, 2024. The counter surveillance device arrived at the motel front desk at 3:17 in the afternoon, in a plain brown box the size of a paperback novel. Gary, the heavy-set desk clerk, who had not asked me a single question in 9 days, slid it across the counter without looking up from his crossword puzzle. I took it back to my room and opened it on the bed. The device was consumer-grade, a flat rectangular unit, the size of a deck of cards, small antenna on one end, USB port on the other. The software downloaded in 4 minutes over the motel Wi-Fi. It claimed to detect wireless audio transmitters within 30 feet and mirror their signal, turning the bug into a two-way feed. I was not within 30 feet of my house. I needed to be closer. At 9 that evening, I drove to Sycamore Hill Road and parked 2 blocks away. I sat in the car with the laptop open on the passenger seat device, plugged in, antenna extended, and ran the sweep. The bug Diane had planted under my kitchen table transmitted on a frequency the software identified in 40 seconds. I mirrored the signal. At first, nothing. The refrigerator cycling, the furnace pushing warm air, the particular settling silence of old wood at night. Then Diane's voice came through the speakers with a clarity that made me flinch. I put on headphones. "Scott." Sharp clipped the tone she used when irritated and not bothering to hide it. "What do you want?" A pause. Then a thinner voice from the far end of a phone call. "Scott Pruitt, my son-in-law." The man I had walked Diane toward at the altar of St. Lawrence Episcopal 3 years ago. "I heard about Maggie. Is she okay?" "She's fine. Hospitalized. Minor reaction. Dismissal instant and total." "Why are you calling?" "I have the recordings, Diane." I grabbed a pen and turned over a receipt from my jacket pocket. I wrote Scott recordings. "What recordings?" Not a question. A blade. From July. 6 months. Every conversation. His voice picked up speed the way people talk when they have rehearsed something many times and are finally saying it. "I started after you told me about the foundation money. When you said we would handle your father if he found out. I knew what you meant. I've been recording everything since then." The car went very quiet around me. "You're lying." Diane's voice dropped to its most dangerous register, not loud, not sharp, but precise. "You wouldn't." "I would. I did." His voice cracked. "I started because I thought you were having an affair with Gerald. Then I heard the conversation in October. About the wine cellar. About accelerating things. I know what you're planning, Diane. And I have you talking about your mother." Silence stretched between them. I pressed the headphones harder against my ears. Eleanor. Scott said, his voice nearly inaudible. You told me what happened on the boat. I have that too. My pen stopped moving. You're threatening me with recordings you can't use without incriminating yourself, Diane said finally. You agreed to help. You're on those tapes too. I know. He sounded exhausted past the point of tiredness, worn through at something structural. I'm not threatening you. I'm telling you I'm done. Leave your father alone, or we both go to prison. A long silence. Diane's breathing slow and controlled. Fine. We'll talk when you get back. Where are you? Manhattan. Back Sunday night. We'll meet then. Face to face. The call ended. I sat in the dark car, headphones still on pen, motionless, staring at the windshield. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking. A porch light clicked on, then off. Scott had 6 months of recordings. The wine cellar. The foundation money. Eleanor, the boat, the carbon monoxide. The thing I had mourned as an accident for 7 years, while the person responsible sat across my Thanksgiving table and cried at exactly the right moments. I wrote Eleanor Boat, Scott has it on tape, and circled it until the pen tore through the paper. At 11:52 that night, the kitchen bug picked up voices again. I was back at the motel, headphones on, coffee going cold. Diane first, then Gerald Ashton's unhurried baritone. Scott has recordings. 6 months. How much Gerald assessed risk the way accountants assess numbers without emotion. Everything. He says he has Eleanor too. A pause. Then we move up the timeline, this weekend, before he gets back. Agreed. The wine cellar, Sunday night, 10 p.m. The rack isn't bolted, Gerald continued. Tile floor, no grip. 800 pounds with the bottles. One push at the base and the center of gravity does the rest. There's no outcome where he walks away. I know, Diane said. I've measured the angle. And if he somehow... He won't. A brief pause. I've done this before, Gerald. It works. I hit save. Uploaded to all 3 cloud accounts. Then I sat in the dark motel room with the headphones around my neck and the cold coffee in my hand and stared at the wall. I've done this before. The boat. June 7 years ago, Eleanor below deck, the engine I had gone up to check because it had been running rough since we left the marina. The Coast Guard. The carbon monoxide ruling. The months I had spent blaming myself for every small decision that had led to that afternoon. Eleanor had known. She had written it in her log. She had seen the beginnings and been afraid and hidden everything in the safest room in the house. And my daughter had sat beside me at the funeral and wept. I looked at the clock. 1:17 in the morning. 18 hours until 10 p.m. I opened my notebook and wrote in large letters across the top of a clean page, Sunday. Wine cellar, 10 p.m. She has done this before. Eleanor. Confession recorded. 3 backups. Then I underlined Eleanor's name. Once, twice, 3 times. The pen going through the paper on the 3rd. Sunday morning, November 24th, 2024. I had slept 3 hours. The alarm on my phone went off at 6, and I was already awake, lying on the motel bed with the laptop open beside me, watching the kitchen camera feed cycle through its night vision gray. At 6:22, Dennis appeared on screen. He was in the kitchen, in yesterday's clothes. Lily on his hip, her head resting against his shoulder, with the absolute boneless trust of a child who believes completely in the person holding her. Cole walked in behind him in his dinosaur pajamas, dragging a stuffed elephant by one ear, and Dennis shifted Lily to his left arm and opened the refrigerator one-handed, and stood there looking at the contents with the expression of a man trying to solve a problem that is much larger than breakfast. His phone lit up on the counter beside him. He glanced at it, put it face down without answering, picked up Lily's sippy cup, set it down again. At 6:48, my phone buzzed. Dennis's burner number. The one I had slipped into his jacket pocket 3 days ago. Mr. Caldwell. I heard everything through the vent. I'm terrified. What do I do? I sat up and typed back immediately. Stay calm. Act normal. Sunday morning you take the kids and leave as planned. I'll handle the rest. You're safe. I promise. The 3 dots appeared and disappeared twice before his response came. Okay, I can do that. Are you sure, completely sure? You've done nothing wrong, Dennis. Take your kids and go. I watched him on the camera feed, read the message. He set the phone down on the counter very carefully and pressed both hands flat against the tile surface and stood there with his head bowed for a moment. Then he straightened up, kissed the top of Lily's head, and said something to Cole that made the boy nod seriously and toddle back toward the hallway. Probably something about getting dressed. At 9:14, a text came from Diane to Dennis I knew, because he showed me the screenshot afterward. She had told him to meet her at Riverside Park, a small green space with a picnic area and playground, 2 miles from the house at 9 a.m. Said she had the rest of his money and did not want him coming back to the house in case I returned unexpectedly. She was clearing the stage. At 9:26, Dennis texted me from the park. She's here, giving me the envelope, 9/31, 10,000, cash. She said, "Forget you ever met me. I asked if you were okay." She laughed, said, "He'll be fine. Kids are in the car. We're leaving now." 9:35, driving east toward Brevard. Kids are safe. Good luck, Mr. Caldwell. I set the phone down and looked at the 5 camera feeds. The house was empty for the first time since Dennis had arrived 8 days ago. Every room still, every angle clear. Morning light coming through the kitchen curtains the way it always did at this hour, that particular slant of late November sun that caught the dust in the air and made the kitchen look like a painting. I had lived in that house for 11 years. Eleanor and I had chosen it together, the wraparound porch, the mature oak trees in the backyard, the wine cellar that the previous owner had described as the house's best feature. We had carried boxes through that front door on a cold Saturday in January, and Eleanor had stood in the kitchen on our first night there and made soup on the stove and said, "This is ours now." Raymond and I had believed her completely. I packed the laptop into its bag and drove back to Sycamore Hill Road for the last time. I went in through the back alley, through the mudroom, down the basement stairs, into the wine cellar, past the rack that stood against the far wall with its 11 years of accumulated bottles, and down into the panic room, pulling the hydraulic panel closed above me with a sound like a vault door settling into place. I set up the folding table, connected the laptop, checked all 5 feeds, opened the external hard drive and confirmed the backups were current. Then I sat in the cold, steady light of that underground room and waited. At 10:52 in the morning, my phone rang. Diane's name on the screen. I answered on the second ring, keeping my voice soft and slightly hoarse, the voice of a man who had not been sleeping well, which was at least entirely true. "Sweetheart. Dad." Her voice was warm with concern, immediate and practiced. "I'm so glad I caught you. Listen, I stopped by the house earlier to drop off some groceries, and I noticed something worrying. There's water in the wine cellar, near the back wall. I think a pipe might have burst." I let a beat of silence pass. Water. A puddle spreading toward the foundation wall. "It's getting worse, Dad. I'm worried about structural damage if we don't address it quickly. Can you go check? I'd come with you, but I'm across town, and it might take me an hour to get there." "I'm not feeling great today, Diane." I let my voice carry a thread of real exhaustion. Can it wait until tomorrow? A slight pause, barely perceptible, the pause of a person recalculating. Dad, honestly, it looks serious. If the foundation gets compromised, we're talking tens of thousands in repairs. I'll come as soon as I can. Please just take a quick look and tell me what you see. I'll be there in an hour. I exhaled slowly, letting her hear it. All right. I'll meet you down there in an hour. Thank you, Dad. I love you. Love you too, sweetheart. I ended the call and set the phone face down on the folding table. She was good. The concern was flawless, specific enough to be convincing, urgent enough to override objection, caring enough to disarm suspicion. If I had not spent the last 11 days watching her, I would have believed every word without hesitation. I picked the phone back up and dialed 911, Sunday, November 24th, 2024. The 911 dispatcher answered before the second ring had finished. 911, what is your emergency? I kept my voice measured and clear. This is former federal judge Raymond Caldwell. My badge number is Juliet 7731. I am about to be attacked by my daughter at my home address, which is already in your system. I need units dispatched immediately, but they must hold position 2 blocks from my address. No sirens, no visible approach. I need to record her confession on tape before police make contact. I am leaving this line open. A brief pause. The sound of keys on a keyboard. Then the dispatcher, a woman with the calm, professional steadiness of someone trained to absorb unusual information without reacting to it, understood Judge Caldwell. I am flagging this as a priority judicial emergency. Units are being dispatched now and will hold at the perimeter. We are recording this call. Please confirm you are voluntarily keeping this line open. You confirmed. She will arrive in approximately 45 minutes. I am placing the phone in my shirt pocket now. The microphone will remain active. If you hear a struggle or if I say the word help, send units in immediately. Do not wait for further instruction. Affirmative, Judge. Officers are 2 minutes out and will stage 2 blocks west on Birchwood Street. Stay safe, sir. I placed the phone in my left breast pocket, screen down, speaker volume set to its lowest audible level, low enough that Diane would not notice the faint confirmations from the dispatcher, high enough that I could hear if the line dropped. The microphone faced upward toward my face. Every word I spoke from this point forward would be captured in real time and transmitted to Asheville Police Department dispatch. I looked at the laptop screen. All 5 cameras recording and uploading to the cloud. External hard drive running its continuous backup. Eleanor's letter in my right breast pocket, the envelope worn soft from 11 days of handling. At 12:43, the driveway camera showed Diane's car pulling up to the curb. She sat in the car for 30 seconds before getting out. I watched her on the camera feed. She was looking at her phone, sending a text, then putting the phone in her bag with the deliberate motion of someone setting aside one task before beginning the next. She got out, smoothed her jacket, and walked to the front door. I watched her move through the house on the feeds. Living room, kitchen, hallway. She was looking for me, checking each room with the brisk efficiency of someone who needs to confirm a space is clear before proceeding. Finding nothing, she moved to the basement door. I heard her footsteps on the stairs above me. Then her voice muffled through the panic room's steel ceiling. "Dad, are you down here?" I moved to the secondary exit, the narrow passage behind the old furnace housing that the diplomat had built as an emergency escape route, running through a crawl space and emerging behind the storage shelving on the far side of the wine cellar's foundation wall. I had tested it twice in the past week. It was tight and dark and smelled like 40 years of dust and rust, and it came out exactly where I needed it to. I got down on my hands and knees and went through. The crawl space was perhaps 18 inches high and 15 feet long. I moved through it as quickly as I could manage, my knees scraping on the concrete, the phone in my pocket, broadcasting every sound. At the far end, I pushed the exit panel open and emerged in the storage area behind a stack of cardboard boxes and an old wooden chair with a broken leg that had been there since we moved in. I stood, brushed the dust off my trousers, took 3 slow breaths. Then I walked deliberately across the basement floor toward the wine cellar entrance, letting my shoes fall hard on the concrete so she could hear me coming. A man arriving from upstairs from the direction of the kitchen stairs. A man who had not been hiding 20 feet below her for the past 3 hours. "Dad." Her voice was closer now. "Is that you?" I reached the wine cellar doorway and called up my voice, carrying the right mixture of tiredness and mild effort. "Coming down now, sweetheart. Where's this leak you mentioned?" I started down the cellar stairs, one hand on the wooden railing, moving with the careful deliberateness of a 72-year-old man with an old knee injury. Every step measured, every movement telegraphing exactly what she expected to see. And at the bottom of the stairs, in the dim amber light of the single overhead bulb, I saw her. Diane stood beside the French oak wine rack, 7 feet of it rising behind her toward the ceiling, its 12 shelves loaded with bottles that caught the light in deep reds and pale golds. She was standing with her weight slightly forward, her hands loose at her sides, her feet positioned with a precision that looked casual and was not. She smiled at me. "Right here, Dad," she said, gesturing toward the floor behind the rack. "You can see it if you get a little closer." Her voice was warm. Her eyes were not. I stepped forward, squinting at the floor, leaning slightly in the direction she had indicated. My right hand braced against the side of the rack's heavy oak frame, an old man steadying himself exactly as she had calculated I would. "I don't quite see," I began, and Diane moved. Sunday, November 24th, 2024. She did not push. That was the detail I had not anticipated. I had expected a push, 2 hands full force, the shove of someone who had measured the angle and calculated the physics. What Diane did instead was step behind the rack plant, her back against the stone wall for leverage lift, both feet and kick. Both heels connected at the bottom left corner where the base frame met the tile. Full force. The stored energy of someone who had been planning this for longer than I could account for. Physics did the rest. The rack had stood against that wall for 11 years, without a single anchor bolt, its own mass holding it in place through sheer inertia. Now that inertia became the enemy. 800 pounds of French oak and Bordeaux and Cabernet and the Willamette Valley Pinot Maggi had chosen on our anniversary, tipped forward like a felled tree, and I threw myself left with everything I had. I was not fast enough. The top corner beam caught my right leg just below the knee as I turned. The sound it made existed in a register below ordinary hearing. It arrived in the body before the brain processed it. A wet crack, sharp and final. I hit the floor. The rack hit the floor half a second later. 4 bottles on the upper shelves exploded on impact, red wine erupting across the tile, mixing with the dark warmth spreading from my leg at a speed that told me something significant had fractured. The pain arrived 2 seconds after impact. It came from below my right knee and traveled upward through my spine into the back of my skull, white and total, the kind that leaves room for nothing else. I heard myself make a sound I did not recognize as my own voice. The rack pinned my leg against the tile. I clawed at the floor, trying to drag myself sideways. The movement sent the pain up another register, and my vision went gray at the edges. Then Diane's voice from somewhere above me. "You should have gone with her." I turned my head. She stood at the edge of the wreckage, breathing hard, her jacket splattered with wine. Her face was composed in a way that no face should be composed while looking at a man pinned under 800 pounds in his own wine cellar, 7 years ago on that boat. She said, her voice dropping to a conversational register, as though we were discussing something over dinner. You were supposed to be below deck with her when the carbon monoxide started building, but you went up to check the engine. You survived. A brief pause. That wasn't supposed to happen. I tried to speak. What came out was not a word. This house. She looked around with an expression I could only describe as proprietary. The foundation, the savings, all of it should have been mine the moment Eleanor died. But then you married Maggie, and suddenly everything I had been waiting for was getting divided up for a woman who had nothing to do with any of it. Her voice did not waver. Do you have any idea what it is like to watch that? To sit at your table and smile while you handed pieces of my inheritance to a stranger? You took her from me. My voice came out as a ragged whisper. Eleanor, you took your own mother. Something crossed her face. Not guilt, not regret. Impatience, the expression of someone being asked to justify a decision they made long ago and have no interest in revisiting. She was weak, Diane said flatly. She worried about everyone else's feelings. She would have given every cent of that money away to strangers and called it virtue and left me with nothing. She bent down and lifted an intact wine bottle from the floor, a Bordeaux dark green glass, still sealed. Her fingers wrapped around the neck. I should have finished this 7 years ago. She straightened. The bottle rose above her head. The sirens hit the air like a physical force, loud, close. Getting closer by the second, the overlapping wail of multiple units converging on a single point. Diane froze. The bottle stayed raised. Her head turned toward the ceiling as though she could see through the concrete and floorboards to the street outside. The basement door burst open with a sound like a gunshot. Boots on the stairs, 3 sets, fast and heavy. Flashlight beams cut through the amber light of the cellar. Police! Drop the weapon! Hands where I can see them! Now! 3 officers flooded the bottom of the stairs. Weapons-drawn flashlights painting the scene in harsh white. The rack, the shattered bottles, the red spreading across the tile. Me on the ground, my leg at an angle it should not have been at. Diane standing over me with a bottle raised above her head. She dropped it. It shattered beside my hip. Her hands went up slowly without emotion, the gesture of someone following instructions rather than surrendering. 2 officers moved toward her. One dropped to one knee beside me, flashlight on my leg. Sir, can you hear me? Ambulance is en route. Do not try to move that leg. I nodded. My jaw was locked from trying not to make the sound I wanted to make. Behind me, I heard the officer recite the words I had delivered to defendants from the bench for 30 years. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Diane said nothing. The cuffs clicked into place. As the officer turned her toward the wall, she looked at me across the wreckage, across the shattered bottles, and the 11 years of living I had done in this house. She looked at me the way you look at something that is already finished. The paramedics arrived in under 4 minutes. They lifted the rack off my leg using 2 officers as counterweight, and the movement produced a sound from me that echoed off the stone walls. One paramedic cut my trouser leg away with shears. The flashlight illuminated what was underneath, which I will not describe except to say that the paramedic's voice when he called it in was the clipped, urgent voice of someone reporting something that cannot wait. Open tibia fracture, significant blood loss, possible shoulder dislocation, multiple lacerations. They stabilized my leg with an inflatable splint, strapped me to a backboard, started an IV in my left forearm. As they carried me up the stairs and out the front door into the cold afternoon light, I caught a final glimpse of Diane through the kitchen window, standing beside a patrol car, hands cuffed behind her back, her face holding exactly the expression it had held in the cellar. Calm. Already somewhere else entirely. She did not look at me. The ambulance doors closed. The siren started. I reached into my breast pocket with my free hand and found my phone. My fingers were shaking badly enough that it took 3 tries to open the contacts. I typed with one thumb, "It's over. She's arrested. I need you." I hit send as the morphine softened the edges of everything, and for the first time in 12 days I closed my eyes and did not immediately open them again. Sunday evening, November 24th, 2024. I came back to full consciousness at 6:17 p.m. in a room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular stillness of a place designed for waiting. Mission Hospital again. Different room from where Maggie had been. My right leg was suspended in a plaster cast from mid-thigh to ankle, elevated by a pulley system attached to the bed frame. My left shoulder was immobilized in a padded sling, the dislocation reduced in surgery while I was under general anesthesia. An IV drip ran into my right forearm, and a morphine pump sat on the bedside table, its cord trailing to a button in my left hand, which explained why everything felt several degrees removed from real. Maggie was in the chair beside me. She was holding my hand with both of hers. Fingers wrapped around mine so tightly I could feel each individual knuckle. When I opened my eyes, she made a sound that was not quite a word and not quite a cry, and pressed her forehead against the back of my hand. "Hey." My voice came out like gravel through a wet cloth. "Hey yourself." She lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen. A crease on her cheek from the armrest told me she had been sitting long enough to fall asleep against it. "You scared me to death, Raymond Caldwell." "I know. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Just don't do it again." She tightened her grip. Ever. At 7:30, the door opened. Detective Carol Marsh came in first, followed by a man I had not seen before, mid-40s, broad-shouldered gray at his temples, a federal badge clipped to his belt, with the worn ease of someone who had been carrying one for a long time. "Mr. Caldwell, this is Special Agent Daniel Holt, FBI. He's been assigned to the case." Holt pulled a chair to the far side of the bed and sat. His manner was direct without being aggressive, the manner of someone who understood the person in front of him, had been through enough. "We have the 911 recording," he said. "And your camera footage. 5 cameras, 12 days. Everything time-stamped and chain of custody documented through the cloud platform." "There's more," I said. Maggie reached into the overnight bag she had collected from the panic room before coming to the hospital and placed the items on the rolling table. My laptop, the external hard drive, the spiral notebook, Eleanor's log pages in the original, Arthur Pennington's contact information, and the mahogany box with the brass latch containing Eleanor's letter. 5 hidden cameras, I said to Holt. All footage uploaded to the cloud in real time. Username and password are on the inside back cover of the notebook. I touched the hard drive. Backup of all recordings organized by date and time. The notebook is my handwritten timeline, every observation, every timestamp, every name. Marsh wrote steadily. Holt opened the laptop. "Walk me through the key evidence," he said. "In order." I took a breath that pulled at my shoulder and worked through it. November 13th. Maggie's collapse. Aconitine poisoning confirmed by Dr. Walter Sims at Mission Hospital. November 14th through 15th. Discovery of Dennis Harlow Scott Pruitt's identical twin hired by Diane for $15,000 to occupy the house and create the appearance of normal family presence. November 16th. Gerald Ashton entered my home office at 3:42 a.m. and photographed foundation and estate documents same night. I found Eleanor's letter and log in the panic room. Holt looked up. Eleanor, your first wife. She died 7 years ago. Sailboat, carbon monoxide. Coast Guard ruled it accidental. I kept my voice even. In her letter, Eleanor documented 3 years of observations about Diane's behavior. Specific dates, specific questions about the will and the foundation assets. She believed something was wrong and had no proof. She hid everything in the panic room. I touched the mahogany box. I found it November 16th. Marsh stopped writing. She and Holt exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. November 22nd. I continued. Diane entered the house at 10:14 a.m. The bedroom camera recorded her removing Maggie's lisinopril and replacing it with an unknown substance almost certainly aconitine consistent with what hospitalized Maggie 10 days earlier. She also planted a wireless listening device under the kitchen table. I intercepted and mirrored that device the following evening. I have recordings of 2 conversations, one between Diane and Scott, one between Diane and Gerald Ashton. Both discuss the wine rack plan. Diane states she has, quote, done this before. The complete recording is on the hard drive. Folder labeled November 23rd, 11:52 p.m. The room was quiet. Holt set the laptop aside. Gerald Ashton. Where would we find him? Arthur Pennington has his last known address. I slid the notepad page across the table. At 9:14 p.m. Holt's phone buzzed. He read it and held the screen toward me. Gerald Ashton in custody. Recovered forged estate documents, fake power of attorney instruments, foundation transfer paperwork. Multiple victims identified. He is cooperating. At 11:47, a second notification. Dr. Walter Sims arrested. Offshore deposit of $50,000 from account connected to Gerald Ashton. Sims falsified medical records for at least 15 elderly patients over 5 years, declaring them medically incompetent to facilitate asset transfers. Elder Abuse Task Force notified. I read it twice. 15 patients, 15 families. Dr. Sims, who had sat across from me in the emergency waiting room with his careful professional manner and explained aconitine, had been dismantling the lives of elderly people for years. He had been doing it while treating Maggie. Maggie's hand tightened around mine. How many people? She said quietly. Enough, I said. Enough that it doesn't stop here. I held my phone toward Holt. Scott Pruitt, my son-in-law. 6 months of recordings beginning in July. He's in Manhattan until tomorrow night. He called Diane Saturday and told her he wanted out. He's frightened he's guilty of conspiracy by knowledge, but he's the best corroborating witness we have for Eleanor's death. We'll reach out tonight. Maggie had fallen asleep again, her head resting against the bed rail, her hand still holding mine. I looked at her in the low hospital light and thought about aconitine and lisinopril and a drawer on her side of the nightstand and felt something cold move through me that the morphine could not touch. Then Holt's phone buzzed one final time. Scott Pruitt called the field office. 6 months of recordings. Wants immunity in exchange for full cooperation, requesting meeting. I closed my eyes. Give him the meeting, I said. I want to be there. Monday, December 2nd, 2024. 8 days after the wine cellar. The FBI field office on Otis Street in Asheville occupied the 4th floor of a building that had once been an insurance company, and the conference room where they put us smelled faintly of the original carpet. and strongly of the coffee someone had made 4 hours ago and left on the burner. No windows. A long table with 6 chairs. A digital recorder in the center of the table, its red light already on. I sat on one side with Maggie beside me, my right leg extended in its cast, the crutches leaning against the wall. Agent Holt to my left. Detective Marsh near the door arms crossed her notepad open. Scott Pruitt came in at 9:12. I had not seen him since the Sunday dinner in October 6 weeks ago, when he had helped me carry the extra leaves for the dining table and asked whether I had watched the Carolina game the night before. He looked nothing like that man now. He had lost weight that his frame could not spare his cheeks, hollow the skin beneath his eyes, the deep, bruised purple of someone who had not slept in weeks rather than days. His hands, when he set the burner phone on the table, were visibly unsteady. He sat down across from me and met my eyes for approximately 2 seconds before looking away. "Mr. Caldwell." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I know it doesn't fix anything." "Tell me everything," I said quietly. "From the beginning." He picked up the phone and turned it over in his hands. "I started recording in July," he said. "Diane had been different since the spring. Secretive. She was taking calls in other rooms, locking her phone, traveling to Charlotte more than her work required. I thought she was having an affair." He set the phone down. "I hired a private investigator for 3 weeks. He confirmed she was meeting with Gerald Ashton regularly, hotel lobbies, coffee shops, once at a law office in South Park. I knew Gerald's history. I knew he had lost his license. I started recording our conversations myself because I needed to understand what she was actually involved in." He pressed play on the first file. Diane's voice filled the conference room, clear as a phone call. "We need to accelerate the old man's decline. 6 to 8 weeks. If we wait any longer, Maggie will notice the changes and become suspicious." Then Gerald's voice, unhurried and precise. "What about the physician? Is he on board?" "Diane Sims will do whatever I pay him to do. He's already agreed to declare Dad medically incompetent if we need it for the foundation transfer." The recording ended. The conference room was silent. Maggie's hand found mine under the table. "That's from July 15th, Scott said. "That was when I understood it wasn't an affair." He swallowed. "I kept recording because I didn't know what else to do. I told myself I was gathering evidence. What I was actually doing was not deciding. Every week I told myself I would go to someone the following week." He pressed play on the second file, September. His own voice, younger sounding, somehow afraid. "Diane, I found the papers. The fake will. What is this?" A pause. Then Diane's voice, flat and entirely without effect, the voice of someone disclosing a fact of no particular emotional significance. "I ended Eleanor's life, Scott, 7 years ago. I sabotaged the ventilation on the boat engine. Carbon monoxide built up in the cabin below deck. She lost consciousness in the water before the Coast Guard arrived. Dad was up on deck adjusting the sails. He never suspected anything." Maggie made a sound beside me. A small, involuntary sound, the sound of someone absorbing a blow they could not entirely absorb. I did not make any sound at all. I sat with my hands flat on the table and looked at the recorder's red light and listened to my daughter explain in the voice she used to discuss grocery lists and weekend plans how she had killed her own mother. Scott's recorded voice, shaking badly. "You what, Diane? She was in the way. The same way Dad is now." The recording stopped. Scott set the phone on the table and looked at it, as though it had become something he did not want to touch. That was when I knew I should have gone to the police immediately. I didn't. His voice broke on the last syllable. I was terrified. I was on tape agreeing to help with the foundation transfers. I had accepted money from Gerald through a shell account. I had knowingly married a woman who had murdered her mother, and I had said nothing for 6 months, and I was looking at federal prison time if any of it came out. So I kept recording instead of acting, and that was... He stopped, pressed his hand over his mouth, pulled it away. That was cowardice. I know that. I have known that since September, and I did nothing. He played the remaining 3 recordings. October, the backup plan, the house fire option. Gerald's voice clinical and detached, discussing electrical malfunction as though it were a remodeling project. November, Diane threatening Scott with his financial crimes, her voice containing not a single degree of warmth. December. Diane alone, slightly slurred late at night, talking to herself in a way that was more revealing than anything she had said in any planned conversation. Mom was weak. Dad, too. They don't deserve any of it. They never did. When the last recording ended, the silence in the conference room had a specific weight to it. The door opened. A woman in her early 50s came in, dark suit hair, pulled back a briefcase held at her side with the ease of someone who carried one every day. She had the particular manner of a person who had spent decades in courtrooms and had stopped being impressed by anything that happened in them. Chatrizier Rebecca Torres, she said, setting the briefcase on the table. Mr. Pruitt, the United States Attorney's Office is prepared to offer you a plea agreement. She sat down and opened the briefcase without ceremony. You will plead guilty to conspiracy and obstruction of justice. We are recommending 3 years in federal minimum security, followed by supervised release. In exchange, you provide full cooperation testimony, the complete recording archive access to any financial documentation you have retained against Diane Caldwell Pruitt and Gerald Ashton. You will have no contact with either of them from this point forward. Scott looked at me across the table. I had spent 30 years deciding the fates of people who had made bad decisions in difficult circumstances. I knew what a man looked like when he was genuinely sorry and what he looked like when he was performing remorse for an audience. Scott Pruitt looked genuinely sorry. It did not make what he had done acceptable. It did not undo 6 months of silence while Maggie was being poisoned and my life was being planned away. But it was real, and in the ledger of what I needed from him, it was sufficient. I nodded once. Scott picked up the pen and signed. Torres slid the document toward Holt, who countersigned and handed it to Marsh. Then Torres looked at me with the direct appraising attention of someone who has already formed a complete opinion. I take out Mr. Caldwell. With Scott's recordings, Dennis Harlow's testimony, the camera footage from your home, the 911 call, and the wine cellar confession, we have one of the most comprehensively documented elder abuse and murder conspiracy cases I have seen in 20 years of prosecution. She paused. Diane's trial will be set for February. Based on the evidence, we will be seeking life without the possibility of parole for Eleanor's death, plus consecutive sentencing on the attempt charge. I looked at the mahogany box sitting on the table beside the evidence folders. Eleanor's letter worn soft in its envelope resting on its square of green velvet. She deserves that, I said. Whatever the sentence is, Eleanor deserves to have it on the record. Torres nodded. She understood. Holt stood and extended his hand. You took extraordinary risks, Mr. Caldwell. The evidence you gathered didn't just document a crime. It documented a pattern that we're now connecting to Sims's other victims. You may have saved considerably more lives than your own. I shook his hand. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing. Outside in the hallway, Maggie helped me with the crutches, and we walked slowly toward the elevator. I was aware of the cast on my leg and the ache in my shoulder, and the fact that I had not slept more than 4 consecutive hours in 2 weeks. I was also aware that for the first time since Dorothy Finch had stopped me at her driveway on a cold November night, I was not waiting for the next thing to happen. The elevator doors opened. We got in. "What now?" Maggie asked. "Now," I said, "we go home. Monday, February 9th, 2025. The courtroom doors opened at 8:47 in the morning, and I walked through them on crutches, my right leg still in a walking cast. Maggie beside me with her hand through my arm. I had not seen Diane since the ambulance doors closed on the afternoon of November 24th. She was already at the defense table when we came in, seated between 2 uniformed officers and a man in an expensive suit. Marcus Webb, her court-appointed attorney, late 50s, known in Western North Carolina legal circles for taking difficult cases and losing them gracefully. Diane wore an Orange County Jail jumpsuit. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was thinner than I remembered, her cheekbones more pronounced. Her hands folded on the table with the careful stillness of someone who has decided that composure is the only thing left to control. She did not look up when we entered. I found our seats in the gallery behind the prosecution table and sat carefully extending the cast. Maggie took my hand. Around us, the courtroom filled reporters in the back rows, legal observers from the County Bar Association, and in the second row on the far side, Arthur Pennington, in his good gray suit, his silver hair combed back his face, carrying the particular sorrow of a man who had known Eleanor well and was here to see something through on her behalf. Judge Harold Morrison entered at 9 on the dot. 68 years old, white-haired with the deliberate movements of a man who had spent 30 years on the bench and had long since stopped feeling the need to project authority because it had simply become part of how he occupied a room. Everyone stood. He sat. We sat. "We are here," he said in the flat, unhurried voice of someone reading a document they have read many times. "For the trial of Diane Caldwell Pruitt, charged with 12 felony counts, including murder in the first degree in the death of Eleanor Ruth Caldwell, attempted murder in the first degree in the matter of Raymond Caldwell, conspiracy, elder abuse, and financial fraud. Counsel, are you ready?" D.A. Torres stood. "The people are ready, Your Honor." Marcus Webb rose, buttoning his jacket. "The defense is ready, Your Honor." Torres approached the jury box with the unhurried confidence of someone who does not need the jury to like her, only to believe her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "this case is about a daughter who decided that her parents' lives were worth less than their estate. She let that land. 7 years ago, Diane Caldwell Pruitt ended the life of her mother, Eleanor Caldwell, on a sailboat off the North Carolina coast. She sabotaged the engine ventilation system, allowing carbon monoxide to fill the cabin, while her father stood on deck unaware. The Coast Guard ruled it an accident. For 7 years, no one questioned that ruling. 2 years ago, when her father remarried, Diane began planning again. You will hear her own voice recorded without her knowledge discussing how to accelerate her father's decline, how to remove his wife, how to seize control of an $8 million charitable foundation. You will see video of her replacing her stepmother's blood pressure medication with poison, and you will hear her standing over her injured father in a wine cellar confess to everything. She sat down. Webb addressed the jury with the manner of a man making the best argument available to him, which was not a good one. He spoke about trauma, undiagnosed mental illness, the pressures of growing up under a powerful father. He used the phrase context of her actions 3 times. He did not look at Diane while he spoke. I took the stand at 10:15. For the next 2 hours and 40 minutes, I recounted everything, starting with Dorothy Finch at the end of her driveway on a cold November evening and ending with the ambulance doors closing on a Sunday afternoon in late November. Torres played the camera footage on a large screen. The jury watched Diane walk through the bedroom on November 22nd with the focused efficiency of someone running an errand. They watched her open the nightstand drawer, hold the prescription bottle up to the light nod to herself, and remove the replacement from her bag. One woman in the jury box, seat number 4, pressed her hand flat against her sternum as she watched. She kept it there for the rest of that clip. They watched the wine cellar, the rack falling, my leg. Diane standing over me with the bottle raised, the officers coming down the stairs. When Torres played the recording, I ended Eleanor's life, Scott. I sabotaged the ventilation on the boat engine. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the climate control system running in the ceiling. Webb cross-examined me for 40 minutes. He suggested I had been paranoid. He suggested the hidden cameras were evidence of a controlling personality. He suggested that a federal judge hiding in a panic room for nearly 2 weeks was itself a form of instability. I looked at him calmly and said, I am a former federal judge. I spent 30 years evaluating evidence and ensuring it met the legal standard for admissibility. I installed those cameras because my wife had been poisoned, and I needed proof that would hold up in exactly this courtroom. I hid in that panic room because my daughter had planned to kill me in my own home and make it look like an accident. What I did was not paranoia, Mr. Webb. It was 30 years of professional training applied to the most personal situation of my life. Webb sat down. On February 11th day, 3 Scott Pruitt took the stand and played all 5 recordings. The courtroom heard Diane discuss accelerating my decline in July. Heard her explain in September how she had killed her mother. Heard Gerald Ashton discuss a house fire as a backup plan in October. Heard Diane threaten Scott in November. Heard her alone in December, slightly slurred, saying her parents had never deserved any of it. The defense called no witnesses. On February 20th, after 11 days of testimony and 4 hours and 37 minutes of jury deliberation, the foreperson stood. Guilty on all 12 counts. Diane sat perfectly still as each verdict was read. No flinching, no change in her breathing, no tears. She had the absolute composure of someone who had decided sometime between the wine cellar and this moment that she would not give anyone in this room the satisfaction of seeing her break. I had sat in enough courtrooms to know what it cost a person to hold themselves together when everything was being taken from them. I did not feel sorry for her, but I understood the mechanics of it. Judge Morrison addressed her directly at the sentencing hearing that afternoon. Ms. Caldwell Pruitt. His voice carried the weight of a man who had sentenced people for 30 years and had not become accustomed to it. You ended your mother's life for money. You attempted to end your father's life for money. You recruited and exploited desperate people, corrupted a physician, and used the charitable foundation your mother's memory had built as a vehicle for your own enrichment. You are a danger to anyone who trusts you. He looked down at his notes, then back at her. This court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder of Eleanor Ruth Caldwell, plus 25 years consecutive for the attempted murder of Raymond Caldwell. The sentences will run one after the other. You will spend the remainder of your natural life in custody. He brought the gavel down. Torres turned to me and gave a single small nod, not celebratory, just acknowledging. I nodded back. Mr. Caldwell, do you wish to make a victim impact statement? I stood carefully, both hands on the railing. I do not forgive her, I said. The courtroom was very quiet. Forgiveness requires remorse, and she has none. I watched her face through 11 days of testimony, and I did not see remorse once. What I feel is grief. Grief for the daughter I believed I had. Grief for Eleanor, who saw what was coming and tried to warn me and ran out of time to do it. Grief for the years I spent blaming myself for an accident that was not an accident. I paused. I will carry all of that for the rest of my life. But I will not carry guilt. That belongs entirely to her. I sat down. As the officers led Diane past our row, she turned her head and looked directly at me. Her expression did not change. Her lips moved slowly, deliberately, forming 3 words I could read without hearing them. I love you, Dad. I turned away and looked at the wall until I heard the courtroom door close behind her. Outside, the February air was cold and clear, the kind of Asheville winter day that makes the mountains look close enough to touch. Reporters clustered at the courthouse steps. Someone called my name. Mr. Caldwell, do you feel justice was served? I looked at the cameras for a moment. Justice keeps the living safe, I said. It doesn't bring back the ones who are gone. Maggie took my arm, and we walked toward the parking structure. I was thinking about Eleanor, about the letter I had carried in my jacket pocket every day since I found it, about whether she would have found any satisfaction in today, or whether she would simply have been sad, the way she was always sad when something that should not have happened had happened. I thought she would have been sad. She had been that kind of person. We were 30 feet from the car when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text. Your wife's car has been tampered with. Check the brakes. I stopped walking. Raymond. Maggie looked at me. I showed her the screen. Her face went white. Where are you parked? Level 2. I came separately. I got here before you. Call me right now and do not hang up. I was already moving the cast, making the fastest I could manage feel grotesquely inadequate. I dialed her back as I pushed through the parking structure door, heard her voice in my ear, Le Monde. I'm in the car. What is, do not start the engine. Do not touch the brake pedal. Stay exactly where you are. Raymond. I'm coming. 30 seconds. I found her on level 2, the car still. Maggie in the driver's seat, phone pressed to her ear, knuckles white on the wheel. I handed my crutches to Arthur Pennington, who had followed me in without being asked, and got down on the parking structure floor on my hands and one knee. The cast extended behind me at an angle that sent a hot wire of pain up through the fracture site and into my hip, 3 months of healing compressed into one sharp reminder. I breathed through it slowly and took out my phone and used the flashlight. The brake line on the driver's side rear ran from the master cylinder down along the frame to the caliper. Midway along the line, partially obscured by the frame bracket, there was a score mark. A thin lateral cut through the outer wall of the metal line, deep enough to weaken it significantly without severing it. Designed to hold under normal pressure and fail under hard braking, exactly the kind of stop you would need to make at highway speed if something appeared directly in front of you. I photographed it 3 times before I called Holt. The FBI forensic team arrived in 19 minutes. A mechanic named Luis Cordero confirmed the cut was fresh, no oxidation, on the exposed metal clean edges from a blade made within the previous 4 hours, while Maggie and I had been inside the courthouse. The parking structure security footage took Holt's team 40 minutes to pull. When they found it, Holt came to where we were sitting in the back of an FBI vehicle and showed me his phone. Level 2. 4:37 p.m., while Torres had been presenting closing arguments inside. A figure in a dark hoodie, average height, moving along the row of parked cars with the unhurried purposefulness of someone who knows exactly which car they are looking for. He stopped beside Maggie's car, knelt for 11 seconds, stood and walked away. The camera angle did not catch his face. Craig Bowen, Holt said. Ex-military special forces background. Gerald Ashton hired him 2 years ago for surveillance, and what Gerald described in his financial records as contingency management. When Diane was arrested, Gerald paid Bowen $50,000 from an offshore account. The instruction was to handle the witnesses if the trial went badly. "The text warning me," I said. "Who sent that?" "We traced it to a prepaid device purchased by Frank DeLuca, Gerald's accountant, the same one who laundered the money." Holt paused. "He has a 12-year-old daughter." I looked at the still image on his phone one more time. "Find Bowen," I said. "We're working on it. Mr. Caldwell, we need you and your wife in protective custody tonight. Safe location in Buncombe County, 40 minutes north. 2 U.S. Marshals on site." Maggie reached over and took my hand. "All right," I said. "Let's go." Tuesday, February 24th, 2025. Frank DeLuca sat across from me in the FBI conference room on Otis Street, looking like a man who had not slept in a week, which was accurate. He was in his late 40s, soft-spoken, with wire-rimmed glasses, and the slightly rumpled appearance of an accountant who had always been better with numbers than with the decisions those numbers were attached to. He had sent the text warning about the brake line. He had done it from a prepaid phone bought with cash using his real credit card for the purchase because, as he explained to Agent Holt, he had not been thinking clearly. "I have a daughter," he said, turning a pen end over end on the table. 12 years old. I kept telling myself the financial work was just paperwork. Shell accounts, offshore transfers. I wasn't hurting anyone directly. He set the pen down. "And then I saw what happened at the courthouse, what Bowen did to the car. And I thought about your wife driving home on that highway not knowing." He looked at his hands. "I couldn't." He told us about Craig Bowen, former Army Ranger, 2 tours overseas, hired by Gerald as a contractor through a private security company that existed primarily on paper. Bowen had done surveillance document retrieval and 2 prior instances of what DeLuca called physical discouragement that had targeted elderly witnesses in unrelated cases Gerald had been involved in. He also told us about Nora Whitfield. Nora had been Gerald's attorney, and before Diane, his companion. She had forged the estate documents, Raymond's fake will, the fraudulent trust amendments, the foundation transfer paperwork for $50,000, and what she believed was a clean exit once the plan was complete. When Diane was arrested in November, Nora had booked a one-way flight to Cancun within 48 hours. "So she thinks she's invisible down there," DeLuca said. "She's not. She wired money to her sister in Atlanta 3 weeks ago. A small amount. But she used an account that was still connected to the shell company Gerald set up. It pinged our system automatically." Agent Holt received the confirmation call at 9:47 that same morning. Nora Whitfield was taken into custody by Mexican federal authorities at her apartment in a coastal town called Puerto Morelos, 40 minutes south of Cancun, where she had been operating a small yoga studio under the name Elena Rodriguez and paying for everything in cash. She was extradited on April 15th, arriving at Charlotte Douglas International Airport in handcuffs, escorted by 2 U.S. Marshals, her head down, as she walked across the tarmac. Craig Bowen was arrested on the night of February 25th at a motel in Black Mountain, 12 miles east of Asheville, after the FBI tracked a rental car through a fake ID that DeLuca had identified from Gerald's records. He was wounded in the shoulder during the arrest when he attempted to run through a back exit that 2 agents were already covering. He was transported to a federal medical facility and charged the following morning. By the end of April, the final accounting was complete. Diane Caldwell Pruitt, life in prison without parole plus 25 years consecutive. Gerald Ashton, 30 years, federal prison, fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, money laundering. Dr. Walter Sims, 20 years, federal prison, elder abuse, medical fraud, conspiracy. Craig Bowen, 25 years, federal prison, attempted murder conspiracy weapons charges. Frank DeLuca, 5 years, federal prison, money laundering conspiracy, eligible for parole after 3 years due to cooperation. Scott Pruitt, 3 years, federal prison, conspiracy obstruction, eligible for parole after 18 months due to full cooperation. Nora Whitfield, 12 years, federal prison, forgery, money laundering conspiracy, eligible for parole after 8 years due to full cooperation at trial. Dennis Harlow, no charges, full immunity witness. I sat at my desk on a Thursday evening in late April and read through that list and felt nothing I could name simply. Not satisfaction, not relief. Something more complicated and less clean than either of those things, the particular emotional weight of a conclusion that answers every question you asked and still does not give you back what you lost. Eleanor had been gone for 7 years. Justice did not change that arithmetic. Maggie came in with 2 cups of tea and set one beside my notepad. She looked at the list and did not say anything, which was exactly right. In July, the Eleanor Caldwell Memorial Foundation reopened with a restructured board, new bylaws, and a revised mission statement. The foundation would no longer fund general charitable causes. Going forward, it would support survivors of elder abuse families rebuilding after financial fraud, and individuals navigating the legal system after betrayal by those they had trusted. Arthur Pennington chaired the first board meeting from the same conference room in the Merriman Avenue office building, where he and Eleanor had worked together for 11 years before her death. He cried briefly during the opening remarks, and then collected himself and proceeded through the agenda with his usual precision. I testified at the RICO proceedings in August. 14 additional victims of Dr. Sims's network had been identified by then, their cases documented through the financial records Nora Whitfield had provided in exchange for her cooperation. 15 families in total. 15 sets of people who had trusted a physician to care for them and had instead been declared incompetent on paper while their assets were quietly transferred. I sat on the witness stand for 4 hours and said everything I knew, and I looked at those families in the gallery while I spoke, and I tried to make the testimony mean something beyond my own story. In October, I stopped checking the front door lock before bed. It happened without my noticing. I simply went upstairs one night and was already halfway through my routine before I realized I had not gone back to rattle the handle the way I had been doing every evening since November. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment, aware of what it meant, and then I went to bed. I had been seeing Dr. Raymond Shaw, a trauma therapist on Biltmore Avenue, every 2 weeks since January. He was in his late 50s, calm with the particular quality of presence that comes from spending decades sitting with people in the worst moments of their lives, without being diminished by it. He told me in October that healing was not a destination, that I was not going to arrive somewhere one day and find the grief gone and the nightmares over and the weight completely lifted. What I was doing, he said, was learning to carry it differently, redistributing it across a larger structure, integrating it into a life that could hold it without collapsing. I told him that sounded like something Eleanor would have said. He said he would take that as a compliment. On October 27th, Dennis brought Cole and Lily over for dinner. Cole was 3.5 now, his dinosaur pajama phase having given way to an intense preoccupation with fire trucks that he communicated mostly through sound effects. He insisted on helping make the pasta, which resulted in a quantity of flour on the kitchen floor that I suspect will be there in some form until we eventually sell the house. When the sauce jar tipped off the counter and shattered across the tile, Cole froze his eyes, going wide, waiting for the response. I laughed. It came up from somewhere unguarded and completely genuine, and it surprised me. And then Maggie was laughing too, and Dennis was laughing with that particular relief of a father watching his son not be afraid. And Cole looked at all 3 of us and decided this was the correct reaction, and laughed too loudly for longer than the moment required. Lily fell asleep in Maggie's lap after dinner. Her fist wrapped around Maggie's finger the way it had that first night on the camera feed 800 miles of worry and grief ago. Dennis looked at me across the table. His custody hearing had been finalized in September. Full physical custody. His ex-wife had entered a residential treatment program in Raleigh and was doing well by all accounts, and they had arrived at an arrangement that prioritized the children over the grievances, which is the best outcome that situation allows. "I have them," he said quietly. "For good." I nodded. "That's all that matters." On November 15th, Dorothy Finch knocked on our door with a plate of oatmeal raisin cookies and stayed for 2 cups of tea. She sat in the same chair Eleanor used to sit in when she came for Sunday afternoon visits, and she talked about her garden and about the new family that had moved in 2 houses down, and about a documentary series she had been watching about national parks. At the door when she left, she looked at me with those careful, steady eyes. "You seem lighter," she said. "Not as burdened as you were." "I'm trying," I said. She patted my arm. "That's all any of us can do." Thanksgiving came with a full table. Dennis and the children, Dorothy Arthur Pennington, and Detective Carol Marsh, who arrived in jeans and a sweater rather than her badge and blazer, and turned out to be unexpectedly good at entertaining a 3.5-year-old with a fire truck fixation. Arthur raised his glass before the meal and said in the thick, emotional voice of a man who had known Eleanor for 30 years and still missed her, "To Eleanor, who taught us that love is stronger than anything that tries to unmake it. And to Raymond and Maggie, who proved her right." We clinked glasses. I looked around the table. Maggie's smile. Cole with cranberry sauce on his chin explaining something urgent to Dorothy. Lily in Arthur's lap apparently fascinated by his reading glasses. Marsh pretending to take notes on Cole's fire truck expertise. The particular warmth of a room full of people who had come through something together and were still here. I thought about Eleanor sitting in the cold of the panic room, writing her careful observations in a log she hoped she would never need to leave. I thought about her choosing that room because it was the safest place in the house, the room she most trusted to hold something she needed protected. She had been right about that, too. In early December, a letter arrived at the house forwarded from the State Correctional Facility for Women. The return address was in Diane's handwriting. I held it for a long time at the kitchen table. Maggie came in and saw it, and sat down across from me, and did not say anything, which was correct. I thought about what the letter might say. Every version I imagined, apology, justification, manipulation, grief, arrived with the same texture, the same fundamental quality of a hand reaching out from a place it had no right to reach, from trying to pull me back into proximity with something I had survived at considerable cost. I thought about Eleanor, about the log she had kept for 3 years, patient and careful, and ultimately unable to protect her. About the letter that began, "I hope with everything I have that I was wrong." She had not been wrong. I got up and carried Diane's letter to the kitchen fireplace, the small one in the sitting corner that we only used in winter, and struck a match. The corner of the envelope caught first. The handwriting on the front darkened and curled, and then was gone. I held the envelope over the grate until the last of it fell in, and then I stood there for a moment, watching the small orange glow fade to gray. Maggie came to stand beside me, her shoulder against mine. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Lighter," I said. Which was both true, and I understood not the whole story. The whole story was that I felt lighter, and I still felt the weight of everything I was no longer carrying, which is its own particular sensation, the negative space of grief, the shape left behind by something removed. You do not stop knowing what you lost. You simply stop letting it decide what you do next. On Christmas Eve, Maggie and I attended the evening service at St. Lawrence Episcopal, the same church where 3 years ago I had walked Diane down the aisle and shaken Scott's hand and believed entirely and without reservation in the life my family appeared to be living. The choir sang, and the candles burned, and the air smelled like pine boughs and the particular cold of a mountain church in December, and I sat in the pew and let it be what it was, imperfect, insufficient, and necessary. On Christmas morning, Dennis brought the children over early. Cole discovered that the backyard in winter with the right pair of boots was excellent for stomping in frozen puddles, a fact he communicated to everyone within earshot at considerable volume. Lily discovered the dog belonging to the family, 2 houses down Dorothy's new neighbors, and spent 45 minutes crouched on the back porch, railing a one-sided conversation with it through the fence. At dusk we stood on the porch. The light went pink over the mountains, and then deep orange, and then the particular blue-gray of a December evening in Asheville, and the first fireflies appeared in the backyard late in the year, for fireflies unusual enough that Cole spotted them and went perfectly still in the middle of a sentence, staring. Then he ran after them with his arms out, boots crunching on the frost, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Lily saw him running and lurched after him on her unsteady legs, laughing, reaching for lights she could not catch. Maggie's hand found mine on the porch railing. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked. I watched Cole chase fireflies in the December dark, while Lily laughed and fell and got back up and laughed again. I thought about the question, really thought about it, with all the honesty that 11 months of carrying this had given me. "I think we're going to try," I said. "And I think that's enough." She leaned her head against my shoulder. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, I went to my desk. The drawer that had held Diane's letter was empty now. I took out a sheet of paper and a pen, and I began to write. Not for a courtroom, not for an investigation, not for anything that would ever be entered into evidence or read aloud by a prosecutor or displayed on a screen in a room full of people who needed to understand what had happened. I wrote it for whoever might need it someday, for whoever was sitting in their own dark and quiet place, wondering whether the person closest to them was really who they believed them to be, wondering whether their instincts were trustworthy, wondering whether it was possible to survive the particular devastation of being betrayed by family. I wrote what I knew, which was this: it is possible. It costs more than you can estimate from the outside, and it leaves marks that do not fully fade. And there are nights when the weight of what you carry makes you wonder whether lighter is something you will ever genuinely feel again. But you find your people, the Dorothy Finches who stop you at the end of their driveways because they cannot live with staying quiet, the Arthur Penningtons who show up in their good gray suits because they loved someone you loved, and that connection does not expire, the Dennis Harlows who started out as pawns and ended up as something closer to family. You find your people, and you hold on, and you keep going. That is what remains. There are things I know now that I wish I had learned differently. I spent 30 years as a federal judge believing I could read people, that experience and training had given me something close to reliable instincts. And then the person I had known for 34 years, the person I had held in a hospital 30 minutes after she was born, looked me in the eye across 1,000 dinner tables and planned my end between the bread and the dessert. If there is one thing I would tell you, do not wait for certainty before you protect yourself. I waited too long. I second-guessed what I saw because I could not afford to be right. That hesitation nearly cost Maggie everything. I believe God does not promise us a life without betrayal. He promises we will not face it alone. I found that to be true. Not in the places I expected, but in a neighbor's worried face, an attorney's quiet loyalty, and a desperate father who chose honesty when it cost him something real. These stories, Stories of family justice, of ordinary people fighting to survive extraordinary betrayal matter because they are not as rare as we want them to be. If you have found yourself in something that resembles this, know that survival is not weakness. It is the hardest kind of courage there is. If these dad's revenge stories have stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me what you would have done differently. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe in stories about family justice that remind us who we really are, subscribe. There are more to come. Thank you for walking this entire road with me. I mean that. The story you just heard contains dramatized elements included for narrative and educational purposes. If this type of content is not for you, we completely understand. Feel free to explore other content that suits you better. But if you stayed this far, you already know why these stories matter.